What's poppin', my Punishers? It is me, MT, and welcome back to the Heavy Spoiler Show, y'all. Before Jon Bernthal, before Ray Stevenson, and before Thomas Jane, we had Dolph Lundgren as our very first live-action Punisher back in 1989. And this is going to be a breakdown of that very movie. So, let's not waste any more time and just jump right into it because punishment waits for no one. Like I said before, this 1989 Punisher film stars Dolph Lundgren as Frank Castle, with Lundgren having recently played He-Man in 1987's Master of the Universe film and the notorious Ivan Drago in 1985's Rocky IV. And before Dolph Lundgren was given the role, actor Christopher Lambert was actually the production's ideal choice for the role of Frank Castle. However, Lambert would suffer an ankle injury that would prevent him from participating. Actor Steven Seagal also vocally expressed interest in playing Frank Castle in this movie, but such dreams were never realized. And like I mentioned up top, Dolph Lundgren would be the first actor to portray the Punisher before actor Thomas Jane would do so in 2004's The Punisher, Ray Stevenson would do so in 2008's Punisher Warzone, and Jon Bernthal will do in 2016's second season of Daredevil on Netflix and beyond. The Punisher was also directed by Mark Goldblatt, who has worked in Hollywood as an editor on a number of popular films such as Halloween 2, the first two Terminator movies, Rambo 2, Predator 2, True Lies, Starship Troopers, Armageddon, Pearl Harbor, Bad Boys 2, X-Men The Last Stand, and Rise of the Planet of the Apes. And his directorial debut would come with the release of 1988's Dead Heat, a year before the release of The Punisher. And with a budget of $9 million, the film would gross $30 million internationally when it premiered in October 1989. Getting a theatrical premiere everywhere except for Sweden, South Africa, and the United States. The film would debut with a variety of different names across the world. For example, in Romania, the film was called The Avenger, while in Portugal, it's called Silent Fury. In Mexico, they called it Revenge Is My Name, and in Serbia, it's called The Executor. And it wouldn't be until April 1991 that The Punisher would be released on VHS and Laserdisc in America. And part of the reason why the movie wasn't released in United States theaters was due to the box office flop that was Dolph Lundgren's 1988 movie Red Scorpion. And after that flop, faith in Lundgren's ability to hold his own as an action star was low, so they decided to play it safe with a direct-to-video release. And this movie was primarily filmed in Sydney, South Wales, Australia, and was produced by New World Pictures Australia, mostly because of the limits of the production's budget, which prevented them from being able to film in New York City proper. And before ultimately deciding on Australia as their film set, the production was considering using Seattle, Washington, or Vancouver, Canada as potential shooting locations. And a number of big names in Marvel Comics at the time helped out as consultants for the movie, including Stan Lee, Carl Potts, and Tom DeFalco. And this is mostly because New World Pictures actually had the rights to Marvel Comics at the time. And even though Stan Lee was enthusiastic about this movie's production at the start, and is even listed as the film's executive producer, Stan apparently was not a huge fan of how violent the movie would ultimately come out to be. So he didn't necessarily like the final product, and neither did actor Dolph Lundgren, who would end up refusing to become Frank Castle ever again after having seen the final product and the brutal reviews that followed its release. But he would be a good sport about it a couple decades later when he would do a fun little photo shoot in a Punisher skull shirt for the Launchpad podcast in 2019. And if you love fire shirts inspired by comic book characters, do not forget to hit up the Heavy Spoilers merch store today. We have got all sorts of great shirts and merch for you and the nerdy nerds in your life. We've got a dope new Superman inspired shirt with alien crystal flare, as well as an equally fantastic shirt inspired by the Fantastic Four. So check out those shirts and much, much more over at the Heavy Spoilers merch store today, or I will send the Punisher after you, and that's not a threat, that's a promise. But yeah, despite their low faith in the first movie, New World Pictures would still announce a sequel to The Punisher in 1990, along with an animated X-Men film. However, none of those projects would ever actually end up getting made. But yeah, after an intro that foreshadows the Punisher's coming slaughter of a bunch of gang members, the movie opens with a news report on the release of prominent gang figure Dino Moretti from prison after 5 years, which he was serving for being connected to the murders of Frank Castle's wife Julie Castle, played by actress May Lloyd, Floyd, and their daughters Annie and Felice Castle, played by Brooke Anderson and Holly Rogers respectively. In that very same year, young Brooke Anderson would land a recurring role in the popular Australian soap opera E Street, which would help kick off her career. In the Marvel Comics, Frank's wife's name is actually Maria, and the two of them would have a daughter and a son named Lisa and Frank Jr. respectively. I'm not sure why they decided to switch up Frank's family so radically for the movie adaptation, but director Mark Goldblatt was pretty damn adamant about making his film as far removed from the Marvel Comics as possible. And this is a big reason why we do not see the Punisher wearing his iconic skull logo at the center of his shirt at all in this movie. Goldblatt wanted to create an adult action film very loosely based on the tragic backstory of Frank Castle, without leaning too much into the lore and aesthetics of Marvel's comic book universe, with the Punisher's black spandex suit being one of those aesthetic choices in the Marvel Comics that Mark Goldblatt did not believe would translate well into live action, which is absolutely stupid because subsequent Punisher adaptations have been able to incorporate the legendary skull design onto the character while simultaneously creating dope costumes that don't involve spandex whatsoever. Years later, Mark Goldblatt would express deep regret about omitting the Punisher symbol completely, believing that incorporating the logo into his production would have likely sold a lot more tickets to the movie and helped solidify it as a proper live-action adaptation of a beloved comic book character. And for the longest time, there was a belief that Marvel Comics themselves stepped in to prevent the Punisher production from using the character's signature skull symbol during this movie, but the opposite would end up being the case, with Marvel very much encouraging the idea. However, the skull isn't completely absent from the film, as we can see skull iconography on Frank Castle's metaphorical calling cards that he has in the form of knives that have a skeleton engraved at the end of the handle, which we see for the first time as the Punisher watches an overconfident Dino Moretti, played by Brian Marshall, drive away from the courthouse, completely ignoring the fact that the Punisher has been responsible for 125 murders of gang-affiliated people in the 5 years since the passing of his family. That's an average of 25 murders a year, which is kind of crazy. But that also technically averages to about 2 murders per month, which honestly seems kind of low for this version of the Punisher, who we see kill a whole lot of gang members in this movie alone. In fact, the Punisher's total kill count in this film is around 91 people, making the total number of people the Punisher has killed since his family was murdered to be at least 216. But this number does not include all the groups of people that were killed by explosions, as that number is a lot more difficult to count. And when Dino Moretti gets home, he immediately has his boys check the house for any intruders while playing the song "Winning Isn't Everything, It's the Only Thing" by Bobby Laurel. Then, when the Punisher begins his assault, the second and third goons that face his punishment are killed in front of a stained glass window of a woman in red holding a scythe in her hands, much like the Grim Reaper does. A fantastic piece of cinematography meant to reflect how the Punisher was there to reap some souls himself. And in a similar vein, when Moretti himself emerges with drinks for the boys, he walks under the head of a deer that he has mounted on his wall, not knowing that he himself would soon become the hunted. And it's also quite ironic that the Moretti house, much like Gianni Franco's house, is filled with Christian-type art and statues and whatnot, considering that they all kill people for a living. And we find such a dichotomy within the home of Lady Tanaka as well, as she has various Oni masks on her walls, which were originally made to ward off evil spirits, conflicting with Lady Tanaka's own evil nature. And the local news hears the commotion from outside and approaches the Moretti house right as the entire house explodes. And after Moretti collapses in front of everyone, we get this amazing shot of the Punisher or farming at the front door. And I love this shot a lot because of how symbolic it is towards Frank Castle's overall character. Because right above a Frank surrounded by flames and destruction is the design of a shining sun over the doorway, framing this flaming Frank in a divine halo of sorts. A shot meant to reflect how Frank sees himself as one of God's holy messengers, meant to cause destruction and mayhem in his name, a fallen angel of sorts. And when Moretti dies, he of course has one of the Punisher's skull knives embedded in his body to warn others of what happens when they hurt innocent people in his city, much like the DC Comics hero Batman tends to do when he leaves his bat-shaped batarangs behind. I feel like the way Frank Castle carries himself in this movie is very much inspired by DC's Dark Knight, especially with how the Punisher considers Frank Castle to be dead after losing his wife and daughters in the same way that Batman considers Bruce Wayne as dead following his own tragedy with his parents. Dolph Lundgren would even refer to this film as, quote, Batman meets the Terminator, and we can see that mentality expressed later on in the movie when Frank is being interrogated by the Yakuza, telling them that he was sent by Batman in defiance, a line that was 100% improvised by Lundgren.
Who sent you?
Batman.
And this Batman-type inspiration makes sense considering how Michael Keaton was set to debut as Batman 2 months after The Punisher would debut internationally in theaters. And after this explosive opening, we transition to the sewers of this 100% unnamed city. We're not sure why they didn't just make up a name for the city, but hey, the 1998 Blade movie would end up doing the same exact thing, so I guess it's fine. And you guys can check out my breakdowns of the entire Blade trilogy here on Heavy Spoilers, by the way. And much like in Blade 2, the sewers of this city are abnormally large, which is convenient for Dolph Lundgren's sweaty 6'5" ass who loves to pray to God butt-ass naked apparently. And as Frank prays to his god of choice, he has a flashback of his wife and daughters about to be blown up by a car bomb courtesy of the mob. And as they walk to the car, we can see Frank's red Harley-Davidson 1340 Fat Boy motorcycle behind them, a bike that he used to own before he would transition to the Harley-Davidson Shovelhead Wide Glide that we saw him ride earlier in the movie. And on the back window of Julie's car, we can see a bumper sticker that says, "Stop strip mining." So I am sure that she'd be pretty pissed off at Frank if she knew that he was littering the city with dead bodies. But hey, at least humans are biodegradable, so it's not that bad, I guess. The deaths of Frank's family in this movie happened a lot differently in the Marvel Comics, with them having been murdered by the mob after witnessing a mob hit. Then, after the trauma dump, the movie transitions to the ruins of the Moretti estate, where we meet Detective Jake Berkowitz, played by Louis Gossett Jr. Berkowitz used to be Frank's partner back when they both worked on the police force, another aspect of the Punisher's origin that doesn't match up with the Frank Castle from the comics, as comic Frank actually served in the United States Marine Corps like a real man. And after Berkowitz is grilled by the media and his superiors about his obsession with catching a deceased Frank Castle, he is immediately confronted by Samantha Leary, played by Nancy Everhard. Nancy was cast after the insistence of one of Mark's director friends, Sean Cunningham, who famously directed the iconic Friday the 13th film before working with Nancy on the 1989 film Deep Star 6. And before she got the role, actress Nicole Kidman was heavily considered for the part, with Kidman also having been rumored to have been considered for the part of Frank's dead wife Julie as well. And despite this not coming to fruition, both Dolph Lundgren and Nicole Kidman would end up working together when they both starred in the DCEU's first Aquaman movie in 2018. Sam then reminds Jake that they worked together on busting Dino Moretti back when she went undercover as a hooker. And that moment of Jake, Sam, and Frank taking down Moretti was actually filmed at some point before the scene was ultimately deleted. However, the home video copies of The Punisher would feature a picture of Samantha in her undercover prostitute clothes standing next to the two former partners. Sam then lists off her qualifications and ensures Jake that she agrees with his assessment that Frank Castle is the Punisher, which convinces Jake to let her join the Punisher task force. Then we transition to the arrival of Gianni Franco, leader of the Franco crime family, played by Jeroen Krabbe. And as soon as he gets back into town, he arranges for all the mob families to band together in response to their heavy losses following the Punisher's 5-year rampage, organizing a big-time drug delivery that was set to be a major payday for all the families involved. And news of this big shipment reaches the streets, leading to the disheveled alcoholic thespian named Shake, Frank's loyal informant, played by actor Barry Otto, to learn of what's about to go down on Pier 30. Shake, named after both William Shakespeare as well as his shaky disposition, is an original character created for the movie to replace comic book Frank Castle's usual right-hand man, David Lieberman, aka Microchip, who we saw played by Eben Moss Backrack in Netflix's Punisher series. And it's kind of wild that they would choose an unreliable alcoholic like Shake to replace such a useful sidekick like Micro. But I guess it makes sense considering that this version of Frank Castle is not meant to have any proper attachments after his tragedy. And with this intel, Frank heads to Pier 30 not long after the gang shipment is intercepted by a mysterious third party that begins to assassinate all the gang members. And the first two gangsters to go down have the call signs Red 1 and Red 2. Call signs that also belong to the character Wedge Antilles over the course of the original Star Wars trilogy. And speaking of the Star Wars trilogy, Paul did a breakdown of the original Star Wars films a while ago that you guys can check out on the channel, and I recently did a breakdown of the prequels that you guys can check out here on the channel as well. And after watching the gangs fight amongst each other for a while, Frank decides to join in on the action, eventually leading him to chase down a dope van with the bumper sticker, "Honk if you love Jesus," which is kind of hilarious. And eventually Frank would cause everyone to lose the 6 kilos of dope by landing that Jesus van into the water. The next day, Franco and the other 5 families meet inside of Franco's office to discuss the arrival of Yakuza leader Hideko Tanaka, played by Kim Mayori, and her mute Caucasian daughter, played by actress Zoska Elise in her first ever film role. Lady Tanaka enters the boardroom, demanding that all the crime families serve her and the Yakuza, but Franco refuses her offer before declaring war against that rival gang. Then over at the police station, Sam attempts to use her old-ass HP computer to attempt to find Frank using the police database, with Jake joking that Sam was only on the computer to play Miss Pac-Man, the popular spin-off of the Pac-Man arcade game released in 1982. And on the computer, we can see that the time is 7:55 p.m. on August 15th, 1988, the first time a proper date is given in this movie. And while no official name is given to the city, we can see that the map of the city that Jake has covered in red pins behind his desk is straight up just a map of Seattle, which is an element left over from when the production was considering shooting in Seattle for their movie. And when we get a wide shot of the entire police station, we can actually see sports pennants for the Seattle Mariners baseball team, the Seattle Supersonics basketball team, as well as the Seattle Seahawks football team. And near Jake's map, we can also see news articles on the Punisher titled "Gangland Where God's Hand" and "Who is the Punisher?" And after Sam gets the smart idea to investigate the sewers, we are brought to the St. Agnes School for Girls, with St. Agnes being the name of the orphanage that a young Matt Murdock would be sent to following the loss of his father in the MCU, and the same orphanage that a young Daisy Johnson from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. would spend a few years in herself. In Catholicism, St. Agnes is the matron saint of young girls and virgins, so it is a fitting name for a girls' school. After watching 2 of the mob leader's children get kidnapped by the Yakuza, we witness the kidnapping of Gianni Franco's own son Tommy from his school as well, a school that has an Our Lady of Lebanon statue on the top. We then see Shake make his way down to the sewers to inform Frank of the kidnappings, muttering the words "double double toil and trouble" from Shakespeare's Macbeth as he does so. And after emerging from the dark like Batman, Frank initially dismisses Shake's plea to help the children of the mob families at first, but Shake reminds him that none of this would be happening if it weren't for his 5-year shooting spree, which seems to get Frank to change his mind. And as the mob leaders meet together to commiserate in the loss of their kids, Franco tells them the story of how Lady Tanaka got ahead in the Yakuza in large part due to her having murdered her twin brother after cooking him a goodbye meal. And this story helps to explain why the casino that Frank shoots up not long after this is themed after Black Widow spiders, as Black Widows are also known to betray their families as well, as they are famous for consuming their mates. Frank warns one of the Yakuza goons that his reign of chaos over their business operations would continue so long as the children are still held captive. And when Jake, Sam, and the police investigate the bloody remains of Frank's rampage, they discover the Yakuza's connection to the establishment as soon as they see the back tattoos of one of the enforcers, with dragon-themed back tattoos being popular among Yakuza members in real life. And after the successful job, Frank decides to push his luck by attempting to head to the rumored location of the kids at a local amusement park, with this park being the real-life Luna Park in Sydney, Australia. And when Frank enters the Funnyland building with his bike, we can even see the words Luna Park graffitied on the wall. Marvel Comics would actually shout out Luna Park in a Punisher story years after this in 2010's Girls Comics #1. The Punisher heads there to a Peter file, if you catch my drift. But instead of finding the captive kids, Frank would be jumped by the Yakuza, triggering a massive fight in this amusement park, a fight that was originally meant to take place in a warehouse. However, Mark Goldblatt would end up changing his mind after driving past Luna Park every day on his way to the set and thinking how cool it would be for the Punisher to mow down a number of Yakuza goons there. And some of the pinball machines that we can see in the background of this scene include 1979's Future Spa and Stellar Wars, as well as 1980's Sea Witch. But yeah, after taking out a number of Tanaka's men, he's ultimately knocked unconscious and brought before her, but not before he has his limbs strapped to a rack, with racks having been used to torture and execute traitors and martyrs for centuries. A thematically fitting gesture, since Frank views himself as a bit of an instrument of God himself. And apparently Dolph Lundgren sweat so much during this torture scene that the production had to continuously wipe him down, which is kind of crazy. And I'm surprised that he wasn't sweating more in his actual fight scenes, because Dolph Lundgren actually did all of his own stunts in this movie, using his experience as an award-winning martial artist to his advantage. And to prepare for the role, Lundgren would work out so hard that he would become 220 pounds of pure muscle. In fact, actress Kim Miyako was so amazed at Dolph Lundgren's body that she completely improvised the moment where she drags the thimble on her finger across his sweaty muscles, a telltale sign that this woman was indeed down bad. Frank is able to resist Tanaka's torture attempts even when she begins torturing his buddy Shake. But since the Punisher is the Punisher, he's able to slip his way out of his restraints and take down Tanaka's guards, before strapping one of them to the rack themselves. And I'm not sure why that Yakuza goon was wearing red high heels before the Punisher stretched him to death, but hey, I'm not here to judge how anybody lives their life or death. Lady Tanaka then heads to a meeting with all the heads of the crime families, minus Franco himself. And when she enters, we can see a Miller High Life truck in the background, right before Tanaka and her goons of lowlives immediately assassinate the leaders one by one, with one of them even having their hands pinned to the wall like he was being crucified, much like the Jesus statue that Franco had in his office. Meanwhile, Frank commandeers a public bus in order to go save the captured kids, a bus that conveniently has an ad for child sponsorship on the side, which is kind of funny. And after sneaking into the warehouse and kicking some ass, Frank is able to save every kid except for little Tommy Franco, promising the other kids that he would come back for him later. And this triggers the Yakuza to enter a high-speed chase with the Punisher, a chase that eventually leads Frank into pushing a car of goons into a truck with the words, "Pest problems? Call Ed the Master Exterminator," which is hilarious considering how they themselves were just exterminated by a different kind of Master Exterminator. And eventually the Punisher is able to evade the Yakuza long enough to drop the kids off at the police that were waiting for him at the end of the road with their guns drawn. And during some of the shots of these police cars, you can see that some of the steering wheels are on the right side of the vehicle instead of the left, showing how this production was indeed shot in Australia, where everything is backwards and wrong and there's too many big-ass spiders. Frank is then arrested by the police and jailed before finally being confronted by his old friend Jake Berkowitz. The director purposely kept Louis Gossett Jr. and Dolph Lundgren separated from each other for the majority of the production, just so the two actors could meet for the first time during this scene in order to really capture the awkwardness of their reunion. Jake tries his best to get Frank to wake up and reclaim his old self, but Frank refuses, leading Jake to leave him and the entire police force in frustration and defeat. And later that night, as Frank sleeps in his cell, he has nightmares that are represented through a series of flashbacks of his dead wife and daughters. And during one of the flashes, we can see that Frank Castle's kids are rocking some fresh Spider-Man pajamas during this scene, which was a very purposeful gesture by the director who wanted to pay tribute to 1979's The Amazing Spider-Man 129, which featured the very first ever appearance of the Punisher. This flashback sequence was actually originally part of a much longer 15-minute sequence featuring Frank and his family that was supposed to originally play at the start of the film. And I honestly would have loved to see that as opposed to having his family just be relegated to traumatic flashbacks, because I feel like it would have helped the audience connect with Frank Castle more as a tragic character transformed by grief and revenge. Meanwhile, Gianni Franco sits in his son's room watching a news report about how Frank Castle was arrested after saving every kid but his little Tommy. And I've got to say, this bedroom has got to be the worst designed child's bedroom I have ever seen in a movie. Like, what is this? Like, what kind of child is this? He's got a bunch of toy robots, rockets, and globes in his room, which is totally fine, but he also has a poster of a lady posing seductively next to a poster of the rock band Faster Pussycat. And I'm just like, what age are you? Like, I don't understand what they're going for here. Like, is he a teenager or is he a small kid? But what I found especially notable is how this kid has a statue of a crucified Jesus next to a poster of a skeleton shredding guitar over his bed. Mostly because the Punisher himself would act as a skull-themed messiah for Tommy by the end of the movie. Frank would then be symbolically placed in front of a crucified Jesus when Franco's men kidnap him after flipping his police transport, forcing Frank to help him save his son or risk the death of his former partner Jake, not knowing that Jake was more than capable enough to facilitate his own escape by using the old "I'm gonna piss my pants" trick. And after Jake frees himself, he attacks one of Franco's goons holding a box of pizza before stealing a slice for himself. An action that was actually improvised by Louis Gossett Jr. in the moment because pizza is delicious. Cowabunga! Both Frank and Franco begin storming Lady Tanaka's headquarters as she performs a traditional Japanese dance in front of a mural styled after shunga, the erotic art of the Edo period of Japan. And this sensual artwork serves as a direct reflection of Lady Tanaka's persona as a powerful female villain who weaponizes heritage as power, as it emphasizes themes of control and dominance that dominate Lady Tanaka's character. Because shunga was traditionally created for male audiences, the use of shunga in this context reflects a bit of symbolic irony, as Lady Tanaka herself is not the subject of desire here, but the orchestrator of fear. So by placing herself in front of this erotic imagery, she kind of subverts that imagery and reclaims it, in a way, turning it into a projection of her own power and dominance. And so like the juxtaposition of this intimate art with her cold and calculated demeanor reinforces the idea that beneath her own beauty lies a violent person, and that her poise is just a mask for power. But yeah, after Frank and Franco mow down a room of swordsmen, they walk past a statue under a torii gate, with torii gates being spiritual archways meant to denote a passing from the physical plane to the spiritual plane. I talk all about torii gates in my breakdown of the classic Japanese anime Spirited Away that you guys can check out on the channel anytime after you guys subscribe. Subscribe now. Also, leave a like on this video because likes always help the channel. If you want. I don't know. I'm not going to tell you what to do. But yeah, the figure underneath this archway is of the Japanese mythological figure Raijin, the powerful god of thunder, lightning, and rain, capable of great destruction while also capable of bringing life, a dichotomy that serves well with Lady Tanaka's dualistic character. Then Frank causes the power to go out throughout the facility, causing red emergency lights to cover the scene. And this is before Frank is jumped by two of Lady Tanaka's elite enforcers, played by Japanese actors Hirofumi Kanayama and Kenji Yamaki. Both of these men could not speak a lick of English when they were hired, so the production had to hire an interpreter in order to get them to understand Mark Goldblatt's direction. And after the Punisher deals with the two of them, he immediately faces off against Lady Tanaka's assassin of a daughter before she had a chance to eliminate Franco before he did. And as they struggle against each other in front of this shunga artwork, their bodies become entangled, much like the bodies of the women in the image. But because the Punisher is the Punisher, he is still able to eventually take Lady Tanaka's mute and nameless daughter down. Meanwhile, Franco finally catches up with his son before being ordered to lay down his weapons and execute himself in front of his son if he wants little Tommy to live, laughing maniacally in makeup like the Joker as she does so. But luckily, our Batman-inspired Punisher would arrive just in time to embed a knife in her cranium, officially putting an end to the last gang leader in the city that could stand in Franco's way. And with this new world of opportunity waiting for him and his family in the future, the last bit of business that Franco has to do is get rid of this crazy-ass vigilante that wants him dead. Frank and Franco then engage in a fierce hand-to-hand battle that eventually leads to Frank shooting Franco in the chest, killing him. This fight sequence was actually reshot about a year after it was filmed because the original ending made Frank to look like a bit of an unfair fighter who cheated to win. So they decided to reverse the optics and make Franco look like the cheater instead. But yeah, after having his father murdered in front of his eyes, Frank gives Tommy Franco the opportunity to blast him to Kingdom Come as well, just so Tommy wouldn't grow up to be as hateful and vengeful as either him or his father. But Tommy refuses to pull the trigger and the two of them embrace, a moment that was originally supposed to hit a lot harder if a scene wasn't deleted in the movie that showed Frank Castle having a fatherly type bond with Tommy back when he was a police officer. Then after Frank disappears from the scene, the movie ends with another Frank Castle butt-naked prayer to God in the sewers, just like he did at the start of the film. But yeah, all in all, even though this Punisher film is oftentimes forgotten and given a bad rap, I rather enjoy this movie. Like, I watched it for the first time in order to write this breakdown, and I feel like it does a decent job at being a suitable 80s action film. However, because of how far removed it was from the source material, it's not exactly the strongest adaptation of the Punisher mythos. And it kind of makes you wonder why they didn't just rename Frank Castle and just make this a non-Marvel related production. And while some of the writing and acting performances can be fairly cringy at times, I still believe that Punisher 1989 still holds up as a passable action film in its own right. But maybe I'm just a sucker for films that capture that old 1980s vibe. I am a child of the 90s after all, so I might be a little bit biased. But yeah, that's it for this breakdown of Punisher 1989. What do you guys think of this movie? Let us know in the comment section down below. But like always, you guys can follow me at MasterTainment on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Blue Sky, wherever I am on the internet. But most importantly, follow Heavy Spoilers here on YouTube by hitting that subscribe button and maybe even hitting that like button if you guys enjoy the video. But yeah, I've been MT, you guys have been amazing, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.